Councilor Mejia, are you there? I'd love to just get a quick bit of feedback from you. Hi.
Hi.
So I just want to get your guidance on just in terms of structure of panels and when public testimony and this is that. I have a list of people. Are there any like specific groupings that you wanted?
No, I think I'm just curious if anyone has any time restrictions that we need to know about. I didn't get any communication in regards to that.
Okay. I can ask that at the very beginning so we can see and then I'll probably just kind of give everyone who's on the panel a chance to speak and then we could do Q&A to the whole group. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
And if we could lead, I'm not sure who's here yet, if our attendees are here.
So I see 8 people in the waiting room as of right now. Let me just double check that against the list.
Yeah, if it's okay, Councillor, I'd like to lead with the community voices with our advocates, if that's possible.
Great. Okay. And I see, make sure Dana is added here. And then just from the administration, Mike, do you know, does anyone have any time constraints on your end?
No, Councilor.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to give it just 30 more seconds in case, because more colleagues are joining and we're adding them to the room. And then we'll be ready to go in 20 seconds.
Hey, Tony. Tony, you're on. Hi, Tony.
How you doing, Councilor?
Good to see you, Tony.
Good to see you.
You too.
Okay, I'm ready to go on my end. And let me just do a quick check. So I see it'll be from colleagues, Councilor Mejia, Flynn, and Braden so far. Carrie, are you in the back or Candace?
That's me. I was getting ready to say I'm ready when you are as well.
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Ready to go. Thank you so much, Carrie. Okay, so I will call this hearing on docket number 0356 to order. Welcome everyone to the Boston City Council's Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation. We are here for a hearing sponsored by Councilor Julia Mejia on docket number 0356. So first I will read some formalities into the record and then I will introduce my colleagues and summarize the order of business today. So good morning. My name is Michelle Wu. I'm chair of this committee in accordance with Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order modifying certain requirements of the open meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirement that public bodies conduct their meetings in a public place that's open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually. This enables the Council to carry out our responsibilities while adhering to public health recommendations and ensuring public access to deliberations through adequate alternative means. This public hearing is being recorded and live streamed on the City of Boston's website. It will also be rebroadcast at a later date on Xfinity 8, RCN 82, and FiOS 964. For anyone who would like to testify on this matter, please email Juan Lopez at boston.gov for the Zoom link. Again, today's hearing is on docket number 0356, which I will read into the record. Order for a hearing on community voice in impact advisory groups. The matter was sponsored by Councilor Julia Mejia and referred to the Committee on Planning, Development, and Transportation on February 24th, 2021. I'm joined by my colleagues, lead sponsor, Councilor Julia Mejia, as well as Councilors Ed Flynn and Liz Braden. And we will acknowledge any other councilors as they join us. Okay, so in terms of how we will go and the flow of everything, I'll pass it over first to my colleagues for a brief opening statement. Then we will open up and I will read off the community members who I have lined up as part of our panel. And then I'll ask anyone who is interested in public testimony to just raise your Zoom hands in the chat so I have a sense of who's here for the panel, who's here to testify, and who's just here to watch. And then we will add people in that way as well as we go. So first for opening statements, Councillor Mejia.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, for working with our office to schedule this hearing, especially during our busy budget season. But this is the perfect time to be having this conversation because just as our budget is a value statement, the people we bring into these development spaces is a reflection of our values. We wouldn't be here if it wouldn't have been for the amazing residents and advocates we have had the pleasure of collaborating with. Residents from across the city, including Dorchester, Allston and Brighton, East Boston, have all contacted our office because of challenging experiences they've had with the IAG process. From every step of the process, from the nomination to the training, to the talks with developers, to the final product, constituents have been reaching out to our office with ideas of how to make this process better. We started this conversation with a planning development town hall held earlier this month, and we are following up by creating a steering committee to provide more recommendations. This is a conversation that will have ripple effects across the government processes. We all have work to do to be more intentional around putting those closest to the pain, closest to the power. That's right, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley, invoking that spirit into the space. We are hoping that this conversation will be solution-oriented so that we can quickly implement changes that will better serve the community. A quick shout out to the residents and advocates we have been working with so far. From Allston and Brighton, Jenna, Tony, Jane, Tom, Jason, and Barbara. From Dorchester, Mike and Ann. And from East Boston, Gloria Bell and Naima. Thank you all so much for being here and for informing our conversation. As with everything that we do, it is led by the people who are living the reality. So really grateful to have your partnership in this space. Thank you all.
Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Wu. Thank you, Councillor Mejia. Thank you for your important work and your leadership. I want to thank the advocates for being here. I want to thank the administration team as well for being here. I'm here to listen and learn more about it. Thank you, Councillor Wu.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. Councillor Braden.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to my colleague, Councillor Mejia, for bringing this very important issue forward. Here in Allston Brighton, we are seeing an unprecedented wave of new development, and it is really challenging to recruit folks for IAGs and to keep up with the pace of meetings. And in the virtual space this past year, there have been many, many concerns about access. Although more people are able to attend the meetings, very often the meetings are presented in a presentation mode rather than a meeting mode. So members of the community don't know who else is in the room. It is difficult to have their voice heard, and I really feel it degrades the whole process. While on one hand, doing the virtual format allows more people to actually attend who may not otherwise be able to attend in person. I really feel that there is so much more work to do to improve public engagement and public voice in these spaces. Thank you so much. I look forward to the discussion this afternoon.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Braden. Okay, I'm going to do one more quick scan, make sure I didn't miss any colleagues in the waiting room. I don't see anyone. So at this point, I will proceed. Just one more quick call for anyone from the public who would wish to testify rather than just listen in. If you want to go to the raise hand feature at the bottom of your screens and just press that so I have a sense of who's here to speak versus just watch and listen. Okay, so now I'm seeing a bunch of hands light up. I will, Councillor Mejia, if it's okay with you as a lead sponsor, I want to ensure that we are starting our panel with community voices first, and then the administration has generously said they don't have any time constraints, but I would love to get some just public testimony in even before that, if possible, if people have.
Yeah. When I say
Okay.
leading with the people's voice, I mean leading with the people's voice, and it's all good. Lead with them.
Okay, thank you very much. So in the order that I see 5 hands going up for public testimony. So why don't we put in the public testimony first so people don't have to wait, and then we'll be able to have the full panel and Q&A. So the order will be John Walkie, and I'll promote people into the room as we go through this. Tom Reddy and Martin Roter, followed by Timothy McHale and Rich Giordano.
Councillor Wu, could I ask for something really quick?
Go for it.
Okay, so if any of the folks who are providing testimony actually have questions that they want the administration to answer, I wouldn't mind them utilizing this time to ask those questions, and we could have the administration answer. Because oftentimes what I see in public testimonies is people come in and they share their personal experience and their journey. And I would just encourage people to seize this moment if they have any specific questions that they'd like us to raise, to seize this moment to ask those questions as well.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Okay. And if panelists could, if public testimony attendees could introduce yourself and your address for the record, and then limit your comments to 2 minutes, we'd be very appreciative of that. John.
Okay. Thank you very much. My name is John Walkie. I live at 63 Putnam Street in East Boston. I'm the Waterfront Initiative Coordinator at Green Roots. It's an environmental justice organization that works primarily in East Boston and Chelsea. I want to thank all the city councilors responsible for sponsoring this important conversation. And it's already, as you've mentioned, this conversation's already begun in the community among residents and advocates, and in East Boston with our city councilor as well. I've participated in IAG in the past and have been to a number of IAG meetings just as a public observer. Based on several years of experience of that and with different mayoral administrations, I think sort of say the IAG process is not really functioning the way that we had hoped it would be. And that as just one initial thought is distinguishing between IAGs for specific building projects and for things like PDAs and these larger kinds of things might be something worth thinking about. But first and foremost, the concept, and I love that Councilor Mejia quoted our Congresswoman. The idea, first and foremost, is that we're trying to identify and compensate for impacts of a given development project. So the people who are most impacted should actually be clearly engaged in this process, and an effort should be made to get them into it. And just physical proximity to a project is not the only criteria for that. And there should be an effort made by the planning department to really get these folks in there. Current system typically ends up with a cast of many of the usual suspects from the community getting picked for these groups. And at a time where equity has become a buzzword almost to the point of losing its meaning, we should be clear that we're talking about people who aren't typically on a first name basis with the local elected officials, and more frequently than not, they wouldn't be at these meetings because they're working multiple jobs. They may not speak English. They probably don't understand how the development process works. Who does actually in Boston? And certainly we're talking about, communities of color and low-income folks and immigrants in a big way. And rather than complaining about things, I want to be very clear that appreciative of that AFFH is one way that we're incorporating, or that you guys are incorporating these impact concerns into the zoning code. And then I'm really good at complaining, but instead of complaining, just some quick suggestions. To consider reimbursing IAG members for their time and creating a fund that the developers would pay into, so that that folks who otherwise would be working a night shift or something could actually come to these meetings. Having childcare and food obviously is a low-hanging fruit. Interpretation is required. Also having seats on an AAG, similar to the way that ZBA has specific seats for sector interests, that having renters in addition to homeowners, non-English speakers, etc. I don't know the logistics of how you manage that. Training is something that needs to be invested in a bit more, and bringing people from different neighborhoods together for that training would be probably a very good experience. And finally, the conflict of interest policies around individuals that serve on an IAG, and when there's mitigation monies that go out to nonprofits that those individuals may be associated with. So there should be some clarity around that. And the most problematic thing would be, in the end, is clearly separating the planning aspects of the BPDA from the developer aspects. BPA is there to represent the interests of the community, but it's also there to help facilitate development and to work with the developers. And that sets up its own sort of conflict of interest. And at least in our experience, when the community members can't tell the difference between BPDA staff and the developers, or distinguish whether a meeting is being run by the developer or the BPDA, clearly something has gone wrong. We need to be very clear of the differences between those two roles. And I'll stop there. Thanks. I ran over time.
Thank you very much, John. I had Tom next.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Tom Reddy. I live in Fort Point in the Seaport at 21 Wormwood. In my neighborhood, we've probably had over 25 Article 80 projects in the last 10 years, so we're pretty familiar with and have and experienced both the good and the bad with IAGs. I'd start with prior to IAGs. I'd just take a point or two about the development process itself. It seems as though there are far too many discussions between the planning agency, perhaps even elected officials and the developers about development options for space, whether it's within zoning or outside of zoning. And those options seem to gain some amount of agreement prior to the launch of an IAG. That includes things like the selection of the designation of mitigation funds, the amount of mitigation funds, the beneficiaries of mitigation funds, things like affordable housing, how much is going to stay on site versus not. All of those things seem to reach some level of agreement prior to an IAG being launched. So the ability for the team to actually impact that, frankly, is mitigated. Once these IAGs are prior to launch and then upon launch, I think I'd comment on John's as well, right? The selection, the number of people that get put on IAGs, whether they're paid or not, in the mix, whether they're residents, renters, or business owners in the particular neighborhoods, really needs to be re-examined. I think at times we have far too many people that are on an IAG and they don't spend an appropriate amount of time actually doing the work. Education clearly is a problem, as well as expectation. So when an IAG member gets selected and appointed, nobody really informs them of what that is all about and how much time is expected of them. Once these IAGs are put in place, collaboration between them, collaboration with their neighbors and the community around them is critically important. Very difficult for them to do that effectively, especially in the time of COVID. So that's clearly taken a back seat. And then interaction with city agencies, right? The only time I've seen IAGs truly be effective is where they're actually interacting with the city agencies, not the planning agency, but the city agencies, Parks Department, Transportation Department, other organizations that actually weigh in on these planning agencies. So that also has been impacted with the pandemic.
Could you gently wrap up? Thank you.
Yeah. And then lastly, I'd say, on the recommendations as they come forward, Councillor, clearly they need to be shared with whoever nominated them. Clearly they need to have a meeting where they're presented to the developer, and clearly they need to be directly answered and reviewed and a rebuttal process. So we need a closed loop on the process. So thank you for the time. Sorry I ran a little over.
Thank you very much. Martin.
Martin.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Zhu and Mujia. So I live at 144 Beacon Street in the Back Bay, and I'm speaking based on my experiences as formerly the chair of the Neighborhood Association of the Back Bay and now a member of its executive committee, although I'm speaking on a purely personal basis there. And I think perhaps we are luckier or better organized at this point than some other parts of the city, because NAB itself plays a major role in nominating IAG members, in thinking seriously about who's available, what kind of skills do they have. And then I think very critically, once the AIG is established, making sure that the IAG have access to what the neighborhood organization as a whole believes and different points of view. And I think that's critical, not only to help educate the IAG members who may in some cases be doing it for the first time, but also in bringing issues to the fore that any individual IAG member may not be aware of. Having said that, I'm very much agree with the remarks of the two previous speakers about some of the problems with IAGs themselves, and also, in fact, with the evidence presented in written form by the Preservation Alliance. Sometimes they work well, sometimes they work not so well, for lots of reasons. Sometimes the nominees are excellent, and sometimes perhaps not, and that's inevitable. But I would like to make a broader point, and that is that just focusing on improving the AIG process is not sufficient. There are real problems with the entire development process within Boston, and a previous speaker talked about the BPDA, and I think the value of separating planning from development in that particular role. The role of the BPDA is very critical. Some of the people that we've dealt with on behalf of the developments have been very good, others not so good. That's kind of inevitable. There is another point that's come up very recently, or comparatively recently, and that is the kinds of criteria that are applied in assessing a development project. And in particular, the emphasis has been placed on tall buildings with lots and lots of glass. So bias towards aesthetic considerations and architectural considerations to the neglect, I believe, is very important, of the critical issues of making buildings climate resilient and energy efficient with minimum carbon prints. And has been, I think, neglected to now and needs to change. If I might reverse a popular saying, it's often the people in glass houses shouldn't throw stone. I believe that people considering designs that look like a glass house should be throwing stones because there's too much glass in the building. And that's something which I think needs to be given much, much more emphasis, particularly in this period when we see legislation, rules and regulations evolving very rapidly, and yet developers are very happy to minimize their initial capital costs, to go for things that don't necessarily meet the needs within the next few years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I apologize for cutting everyone off. I'm trying to be respectful of everyone's time and keep us moving through. So I'm really sorry, but I will try to be strict. Jane up next, and then last but not least for this part of public testimony, Rich Giordano afterwards.
Thank you all. An important issue. I've been privileged to be on a number of IAGs in the Alston-Brighton area, and I live in Brighton. And I'm going to read mine so that I stay pointed. I have seen IAGs to have significant impact and collaboration, and others that have very little. The difference to me is training. And when members have an understanding of what the IAG is, its potential impact, what Article 80 entails, and are unified around specific issues affecting the neighborhood, fruitful negotiation can happen. Currently, there is no training provided to IAG members who are expected to assess the pros and cons of multi-million-dollar developments. Read project notification forms, PNFs, that are often 200 to 300 pages of construction jargon, and negotiate with seasoned developers as residents with very little information. Residents are at a significant disadvantage without any training or preparation. So my suggestions are to add diversity to IAGs, more recently in an effort to have a wider range of people involved in IAGs. I saw one IAG that had no seasoned members at all. So everyone was brand new, had no clue what they were looking for, and the project was approved, and there was a lot of issues that should have been noted in that. So I would suggest that IAGs are chosen with a balance of new and seasoned members, that these members, seasoned members, could mentor and train the other new members, and being encouraged to do that. These developments will be here for 50 or more years, and this role is too important to have members with single focus, like the Carpenters Union or whatever, and little education. Second, I would say design an IAG boot camp, which I've been asking BPDA and Brian Golden for a number of years. That would help people to understand the city zoning laws and Article 80 process. And third, develop a report card or a checklist of key issues IAGs should be looking for in each development. Harvard-Alston Task Force, which is like a permanent IAG for the Harvard projects, are developing something like that right now. But for example, it would be a checklist of how is this development going to affect transportation, open space, public realm, affordable housing, workforce economic development, and sustainability, et cetera. So, you know, that's something that you could evaluate a development and how are they doing from 1 to 10 or A to F.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Rich.
Wow. Jane, thank you very much. That was awesome. I would say most of what everybody is saying, I'm sorry, Richard Giordano for the record. I live at 129 Fisher Avenue in Mission Hill, and I work at Fenway Community Development Corporation as Director of Policy and Community Planning. We're at 70 Burbank Street in the Fenway, and I'm speaking as a member for Fenway CDC. At the risk of checklist agreement, I think diversity and expansion of the kind of folks who get nominated to IAGs is important. The point of training, I think ourselves and Austin Brighton CDC, we've all done our own impromptu Article 80 trainings. At some point, we've actually asked BRA project managers to come and do that. But I think that that ought to be part of a regular ongoing thing that is a BRA responsibility. I think we'd get better results all around if we had more, trained people on exactly the points that Jane raised. And I would say, in general, too, we need to make the Article 80 process, whether it's for a project notification, a PDA, an institutional master plan, it all needs to have a little bit more, out there in the public sort of training. It might require almost a little different wing within the BRA to do road shows like that on a consistent basis, but I think it would be very helpful. The length of time of these various things differs, whether IAG, Task Force, CAC. We've had folks who've been reviewing air rights proposals over the turnpike that have been going on for almost 10 years. So letting people know what they're getting into would be very helpful. I think it's also going to be necessary to put on road shows about the new zoning amendment that was referenced earlier, the affirmatively furthering fair housing, and how that will play out in terms of evaluating projects that are going forward. Translations would be helpful, or translators, depending particularly on the neighborhood. It might also be helpful if there were more of an effort to invite the CAC or task force to the scoping sessions, because that's a lot of really nitty-gritty stuff that would be helpful for them to understand. And last but not least, one other point, Councilor.
Please finish.
Thank you. Scheduling. It's not an issue in every neighborhood, but in places like the Fenway and Austin Brighton, we literally have 6 to 8 projects going on at a time. And so we wind up with multiple BRA meetings going on. And then there's a potential for an ONS meeting or a D&D meeting. And so just keeping the calendar clear so that there's not more than one city meeting in any given week would be really helpful to get good neighborhood participation. Thank you, and sorry for going over.
No, thank you very much. Incredible expertise from community members who have certainly been through this multiple rounds. Okay, we will launch into our panel now. We'll start with Glorabel Mota, followed by Tony Disidoro, Jason DeRozier, and Mike Skolka. And then we'll turn it over to our administration representatives after that. And I'm just going to kind of clear out the Zoom room a little bit as we go. Glorabel, please.
Okay, great.
Oh, you're muted, Glorabel.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Perfect.
sorry. Thank you, Counselor. Thank you all. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, for the invitation to and creating time for space to address this very important topic on civic and community engagement. So really grateful to be here. This is something that I strongly believe in, as well as many of our neighbors that make up the core of Neighbors United for a Better East Boston, Nube, where I have had the pleasure of serving for the past 10 years as co-coordinator and lead facilitator. And this has been, for me, something that we have done to be able to build more abundant leaders to work and promote inclusive democratic processes, just public policies, and the ability to create a vibrant economy and environment for all today and generations to come. And one of the things that we believe is most important is that those that are most vulnerable and marginalized in our community must be in the forefront of our public policies and processes, as well as included in civic and community engagement. We believe that this is a way of creating a healthier and local community ecology, and this is what progress looks like for us. So taking the lessons of the past year, the importance of engaging at all levels of democracy and ensuring that no one gets left behind is what we call, we can no longer continue to ignore and support the status quo. And that persistently perpetuates inequities, inequality, and deterioration of social, cultural, and community fabrics. So we believe wholeheartedly that processes and procedures matter. It dictates how people are welcomed, informed, engaged, and included. It's the portal of participation. And we believe that if we approach these processes with the values of uplifting participatory democracy and our belief that all active and willing individuals that call the city of Boston home have the right to participate in contributing to the civic, economic, social, and cultural well-being of the city. And it starts in our neighborhood. It starts with our neighbors. It starts very local. And so we hope that we could promote processes and that the processes are guided by the right for the community for self-determination to make the decisions on the issues that affect them, training and organizing of the community to lead its social, economic, and political development, the unity and integration of the community as an essential part of the quality of life, as a strategic goal of all economic development. So what is the true partnership? How are we integrating the diversity and sustainability of the center that benefits all residents short-term and long-term? And also sensitivity towards the programs and services that serve of the cultural diversity that each neighborhood has, and that it's a strength and that it's something that it requires investment. And we also believe that the elimination of inequality and discrimination is an act of participation, particularly towards our immigrant and most vulnerable neighbors. So how can systems look different is how can people that are most impacted, which in this case are renters, are rarely asked to be representatives there. So creating a welcoming, inclusive environment is essential, and it starts with ensuring multilingual, multicultural, as well as multi-sectoral partners across the board, right? How our organization, elected officials, developers, unions, as well as the residents, the neighbors, the renters, being part of that voice, being part of the herd. The advisory groups should be reflective of those most impacted. It needs to be accessible to all people. Stipends should be provided for their time, childcare, and in this case during COVID, whoever's providing care, if we can't do it on site, so that people could be present, could be very active and civically engaged and learning during this process. We also believe that comprised of the demographics, this is information that the city has, should be reflective of the ecology typology. East Boston is very different than Dorchester and Mattapan. So what does that look like? And creating, it should be an independent from the city and the development and have real power to mitigate and engage with developers. And it should have a community participatory process that's included also with participatory budget process. Like, let's promote these things so that we have more people engaged. And we also believe that part of the planner is to shift that relationship so that there could be a planner for each neighborhood that's building, cultivating authentic relationships, not transactional, so that when issues arise, there are relationships and communications are strong to overcome them. You know, we want to shift this interest from profit-oriented to community-focused, which would allow us to, you know, currently that doesn't work. Thank you for your time. And I think and just to put on the last, like, this is something that we've been, myself and a lot of our neighbors, we participated in 2013 in a lot of the impact advisory groups. We wrote an open letter talking about the economic development, talking about the lack of disrespect of language access, talking about, you know, the representation. And to this day, we haven't had a response. So it's just an indication of where is that feedback, where is that loop, that this isn't just a one-time thing, but how can we plant seeds today that actually get us to where we want to be in creating more inclusive spaces.
Thank you very much, Clarabelle. Tony.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Tony Tisadoro. I am president of the Alston Civic Association. I too would like to thank Councilor Mejia for sponsoring this hearing. Madam Chair, on October 20th, 2000, Mayor Tom Menino signed an executive order which was further amended on April 3rd, 2001, essentially creating the Impact Advisory Group for Article 80 Large Project Review. It was a direct response for more accountability and transparency, given the ongoing practice of developers reaching private arrangements with elected officials and stakeholders in exchange for their support of pending real estate construction projects. It is safe to assume that given the intent of the IAG, as expressed in the executive orders, in comparing its application in the past 7 years, not only is the process broken, unjust, and in many cases ignored, but is so constructed in a way to guarantee a predetermined result. Given the historic development taking place across the city and the urgent need to ensure sustainable communities, I hope this hearing will elevate the discussion for elected officials and policymakers to direct more attention to this vital community review process. In the short time I have, based on personal observations, I would like to focus on some specific recommendations that will help foster the need to reform the process. First, BPDA should conduct quarterly virtual interactive IAG boot camps where potential nominees can learn about the role of the IAG, become familiar with the terminology and process, as well as learn how to conduct an efficient and effective project review using the information contained in the project notification form. The Alston Brighton Community Development Corporation periodically conducts such boot camps, which has generated a very positive response from the attendees. Letters of intent should be posted publicly on the Boston Planning and Development Agency website immediately upon receipt, eliminating the possibility of appointments taking place without public knowledge. Public notification should be sent to subscribers of the BPDA news and updates when an Article 80 large project review is filed, explaining what an IAG is and providing the appropriate contact list to apply, which would include the at-large councilors, the district councilor, state senator, and state representative, and the representative from the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services. Impact advisory groups should be diverse and inclusive and truly represent the people living and working in the impacted area. There must be a sufficient minimum number of appointees, and all appointees should be allowed to communicate with one another informally, and those appointees who do not participate sufficiently should be replaced in a timely fashion. We need to find new and innovative ways to engage Boston's young people. When opportunities present themselves, community engagement groups such as Spark Boston and the Mayor's Youth Council should require participation in the IAG process as part of fulfilling their mission. All appointees and their sponsors should be disclosed to the public as soon as the process is complete and allow a public comment period for community input prior to the filing of the PNF. Sponsors whose nominees were not appointed should be so notified in writing with a stated reason why. The mayor's office and the BPDA's nominees must never dominate an IAG. According to the executive orders, designees of civic and community organizations, as well as residents impacted by the proposed project, should not only be allowed to nominate individuals, but be represented on the IAG. In Alston Brighton, the nomination process is restricted to elected officials and the BPDA. The invitation for appointed IAG members to attend the scoping session of the proposed project is very uneven. It must be consistently applied. Priority must be given to mitigation and community benefits that positively impact the neighborhood where the project site is located. The IAG process should not end once the cooperation agreement is signed, but continue on to monitor compliance with all the legal agreements between the city and the developer and implied understandings with the community. Finally, the packing of IAGs with individuals sympathetic to the administration and/or the developer who practice groupthink and represent narrow political, social, and economic interests must stop. As stated in the executive orders, no amount, quote, no amount of mitigation efforts should allow for the approval of an otherwise unacceptable project, end quote. No project should ever move forward in the approval process when the majority of the IAG members are in opposition. To do so cheapens the process and only benefits elected officials, policymakers, and stakeholders who will eventually move on, leaving the consequences of their actions to those who call the city and its neighborhoods home. Restoring the public trust in the process, where currently many feel the outcome is preordained and exclusive, is critical if we are serious about equitable and independent community review that restores a sense of civic engagement that benefits all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Jason.
Thank you. So John Waukee pretty much summarized my entire testimony, so I will be re-emphasizing many of the points that he originally brought up. So good afternoon. My name is Jason DeRozier, and I'm the manager of community action at Alston Brighton CDC. Thank you, Councilor Mejia, for providing this forum for this important discussion and inviting me to speak. When a developer proposes a project, there is some negotiation with the city and the community to make changes and finalize the development. An impact advisory group, or an IAG, is an important part of those negotiations, and they are one way that developers get community input. Impact advisory groups are an opportunity to have resident voice heard on proposed development projects in their community. IAGs help shape these developments to best meet community needs and strengthen neighborhood assets. However, more work is necessary to ensure that the IAG process is an inclusive and equitable one. IAG composition and the feedback gathered from IAGs tends to only reflect the priorities and concerns of those who have the access, resources, and expertise to participate in these discussions. Alston Brighton's diverse residents are eager to work with their neighbors in efforts to improve the community, but often cannot navigate how to engage. Civic and community engagement is not evenly distributed in Alston Brighton. Although there are many avenues for residents to participate in civic life, public meetings and IAGs in large part are dominated by white upper middle class homeowners and renters whose first language is English. Urban planning, zoning, and development are topics of privilege that impact every one of us. Community meetings and notices tend to reach those already somewhat in the know, and IAGs are made up of residents nominated by elected officials and city representatives, but they are often constrained to nominate those they already know, those who regularly attend community meetings and planning discussions. Furthermore, the current process overly emphasizes benefits and forward momentum and does not sufficiently address risk, the unintended harms and permanent impacts that can result when development explodes within a community. We gloss over community changes like gentrification, loss of diversity, alienation, and destabilization of lower income residents. To address some of these concerns on the local level, the Alston Brighton CDC has launched the People's Planning Initiative, or PPI, to focus on people-centered planning and advocacy. The People's Planning Initiative is a series of workshops that provide a space to educate community members about urban planning concerns in their neighborhood and the skills to be effective advocates for community change. Our goal for the PPI is to bring community members together with common stories to build community solidarity and power. Workshops and activities offered through the PPI include a crash course on the Article 80 development review process, an IAG boot camp, coffee hours to assist residents in writing comment letters, and handouts and resource guides on Article 80, primers on zoning and community planning principles. To date, we have had 78 Allston Brighton residents go through the PPI over a 2-year period and have facilitated 4 roadshow trainings for organizations in Jamaica Plain, East Boston, Roxbury, South Boston, and Dorchester. This is important work, and we have had some success, but this is a challenge that stretches well beyond Allston Brighton. The need to diversify IAGs and center community voice in the process is crucial in ensuring that those who are most impacted by development projects have a seat at the table. As they say, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. To foster an inclusive and meaningful community process, I recommend the following strategies to enhance IAGs. A website or a section on the BPDA website where residents who are interested in serving on an IAG can sign up with their name, neighborhood, and address, with a short description on why they would like to serve. Having a roster of potential IAG members would help elected officials and city representatives make informed nomination for IAG participation and diversify the candidate pool. A primer or a description of what a project notification form is before getting the complex document in the mail, which can cause some confusion or even overwhelm new IAG members not familiar with the process and complex terminology. Also, having P&Fs or supplemental information available in other languages would help recruit and involve non-native English speakers in the IAG discussion and process. Not speaking English should not be a barrier for participation. Take advantage of community partnerships. We want the BPDA to understand that they do not have to do this on their own. There are partnerships that can be forged and strategies that can be put in place to expand opportunities for people to participate, such as working with and funding or providing resources to organizations and community groups who offer workshops on leadership development, community planning, and/or advocacy to serve as local training entities for new IAG members. Proactively reaching out to property owners such as CDCs and community groups in advance of projects which would require an IAG, with information that can be shared with tenants and residents highlighting the roles and responsibilities of an IAG and opportunities to become engaged in the process. These materials should be made available in other languages upon request. Collaborating with community partners and stakeholders to amplify the process to ensure those who have challenges in attending virtual meetings like we're in now, or are not native English speakers, are able to have their voices heard in this process. Zoning is often discussed in technical terms, but it is never neutral. There should be more honesty in discussing zoning and its impact. Who does zoning serve? Who do we want to live and work in our communities? If not here, then where? I would like to close my testimony with a quote from Jose Richard Aviles, a multimedia artist, urban planner, and social worker based out of Los Angeles. Lived experiences should be leveraged and seen as truth, even when planners can't connect with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mike.
Hi, everybody. How's it going? So let's see. Thanks for having me here today. Special thanks to Councilor Mejia and her office for inviting me and everybody else, I think. So thanks. It's awesome. Really, really exciting. Thanks to everyone who's already spoken. I appreciate you, and I appreciate all the work you do. And I appreciate the work of the BPDA as well. Thanks for joining us. And I appreciate all the people throughout the city who have participated on IAGs and CACs over the years. And really, that's the best place to start. I appreciate the concept of impact advisory groups, and I think that they can serve a valuable purpose. But I do think that the criticism the concept receives is deserved. And fortunately, that criticism can guide us to making better decisions going forward. My name's Mike Skolka, and I'm currently president of the Columbia Savin Hill Civic Association. But my interest in civic engagement in the development process predates my leadership in this group. In fact, it was that interest in improving civic engagement that led me to be more involved in the Civic Association. So the problem, to put it simply, nobody knows what IAGs are. I think somebody said that earlier, actually. People in general don't know much of anything about development processes in the city. And considering the impact of all the projects coming to the city, that is a very dangerous thing. I do not believe that the information is being kept from residents. Like I don't imagine that there are nefarious intentions in this process. It's not that. Information on development is made available to residents, but there's a crucial difference between information being available and ensuring that residents are well informed. So I work in education, so I think of it like this. It's the difference between a teacher handing out textbooks and telling their class, I don't know, read chapter 3, or don't, it's up to you, versus a teacher taking the time to craft an engaging lesson where knowledge is not merely shared, but then is used. Good teaching is when knowledge is imparted, and then that learning is actively used by students. I can't emphasize it enough. Making information available is not enough. We as a city need to actively engage with all residents, ensure that they feel heard, lift up their voices, and value their perspectives. When we have achieved this, we will be a better, stronger city. Now, some thoughts on how we can do this. Really preliminary thoughts. I could come up with many more, but the city should invest time and energy into building up its civic and neighborhood associations. All civic and neighborhood groups have working relationships with city agencies, but the city could do more to support these organizations, such as providing workshops on how to recruit new residents and residents who have not participated as much over the years. Look at all the signs the city put up about wearing masks and maintaining social distancing. It was great. It's valuable. We could do something similar to promote our civic and neighborhood associations. And we'd also be ensuring that all residents have a voice in those groups, because that can be a challenge for civic and neighborhood groups. We've got to try it. We'll never know if it's effective until we try it. And to the criticism that IAGs leave out certain community groups in favor of other groups, this is fair criticism, as you know, many people have told me. Criticism is a good thing because it can guide us to better decisions in the future. We can change the number of members in an IAG and maintain a list of all active groups in an area, so that when an IAG is formed, there can be a representative from every relevant group. I mean, just change the process of how you become on the IAG. Some people have said this before, and I agree. And not just also the groups that have a reputation of being prickly about development, not including them, but especially those groups, right? We need to ensure that every voice in the community is heard. Disagreement is productive if we use it effectively, and we should respect it and make the most of it. Let's see, another suggestion, the city, civic and neighborhood associations, other community-based organizations need to be more aware of what residents' actual concerns are. At Columbia Savin Hill, some of our members created the backbone of a survey that we can distribute to membership and residents in general. I'm still in the process of refining the tech aspects of it. It's a long process, but when it's done, I'd be more than happy to share it with anyone who might like to use it, check it out, make comments on it. You know, happy to. It's a Google Doc survey, so it's pretty easily shareable. We hope that it will help us show city agencies what people's real concerns are, so that groups like IAGs can make more meaningful decisions. And if anyone would like to talk further about this, I'm readily available. You can have my email address, phone number, whatever. I'm happy to talk. Also, my name, I'm the only person with that name, basically. So look me up. It's fine. So lastly, none of this strikes me as easy, right? But as a local politician said some years ago, we do things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. He was right. Our efforts in this will measure the best of our energies and skills. This is an exciting undertaking. It is not space travel, but that might be more exciting. I don't know if Boston has the budget for that. It's not space travel, but it's exciting, for me anyway. And I think for all of us who are here, I'm really thrilled to be a part of it. Thank you so much for having me, and look forward to talking more about it soon.
Thank you very much. Okay, we've now assembled a lot of feedback and anywhere from broad to very specific recommendations and issues. So would love to hand it over to the BPDA team in whatever order, but if you could, we would really appreciate if you could respond to what you've heard so far. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and the council. Particularly thank you to Martin, Tom, Glorabelle, Tony, John, Jane, Rich, Jason, and Mike for your participation today, but also I know a lot of you, your continued participation in our in the public process relative to the City of Boston. I'm going to go through a statement, and then I will turn it over for Q&A. My name is Michael Christopher. I am the Deputy Director of Development Review at the Boston Planning and Development Agency. I am joined by my colleagues from the BPDA, Dana Whiteside, who's the Deputy Director of Economic Development, Jonathan Greeley, who is the Director of Development Review, and Barry Reeves, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. We welcome the opportunity to join you today and are grateful to have the chance to briefly describe our work with impact advisory groups, formerly known as IAGs. More importantly, we're here to listen, to answer your questions, and provide clarity on any points of interest which you might have. I will further detail the IAG process in a moment, but it is first worth noting that historically, Article 80 review is based on the environmental impact analysis of the proposed development on the built environment. As our process has evolved, we have broadened our approach to also focus on things like affordable housing, affordable commercial space, displacement, other impacts neighborhoods face as a result of development. Working with this body, we recently adopted the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Zoning Amendment for residential projects or mixed-use projects with residential components undergoing large project review and/or plan development review under Article 80. The zoning amendment requires developers to consider impacts on area residents historically discriminated against so that steps can be taken to reduce those impacts, provide new housing opportunities, and address past histories of exclusion. The BPDA has also recently adopted a language access plan furthering this commitment and outlining the steps involved in ensuring that persons with limited English proficiency have meaningful access to the agency's planning and development review public process. As the hearing order outlines, IAGs were first created through a mayoral executive order in 2000 and later amended in 2001. These orders set the framework for how an IAG is assembled and the role the group plays in the Article 80 large project review process. I will attempt to be brief as I walk through the steps, but we can go into further detail on any component that may be of interest to you. The formation of an IAG begins when a developer submits their first formal filing called a letter of intent to the BPDA, which informs the agency that the developer intends to begin the Article 80 process. Upon the receipt of the letter, the BPDA solicits nominations for IAG members from the district, city councilor, state representative, and state senator. The BPDA also seeks nominations from at-large city councilors, BPDA planning, and the Mayor's Office of Neighborhood Services. The goal when forming an IAG is to have a mix of residents, local business owners, and/or designees of community organizations within the impacted area. The Article 80 public review process formally begins when the developer submits a project notification form known as a PNF. A PNF follows the letter of intent and describes the features of the proposed project and is available to the public for review and comment. It is also sent directly to the IAG members. Project manager also coordinates what is called a scoping session with City Boston agencies as well as several state regulatory agencies. The scoping session allows the proponent to outline the details of this project and the regulatory agencies offer feedback. The IAG also participates in this meeting so they can hear this dialogue. Project manager then sets up a series of public meetings, both with the IAG and the general public. Although most IAG meetings are intended to be working sessions for the nominated group, the public is always welcome to attend, and time is allocated at the end of each meeting for public comment. Depending on the size of each project, there is a 30-day comment period for initial review. For the majority of projects, that time period is extended. For most projects, there are several public meetings that take place to discuss. Once the comment period is concluded, we then gather public comment from the general public, the IAG, regulatory agencies, and local elected officials to determine next steps. If, after review of a project's PNF by the BPDA, city agencies, and the public, it is determined that there is additional information required, the BPDA will issue a scoping determination which details which areas of the proposal require further study to be included in a draft project impact report. The submission of a DPIR requires another comment period, followed by further regulatory IAG and public review. When determining next steps, the goal is to try to build in IAG and public comment on the final details of the project that is ultimately recommended to the BPDA board. Throughout the Article 80 process, the role of the IAG is to assess the project and its environmental and social impacts as it relates to the surrounding neighborhood, and then advise the BPDA on appropriate mitigation measures to offset those impacts. The mitigation could be physical changes to the project, such as increased setbacks or alternate massing, infrastructure improvements, such as traffic signals or updated sidewalks, improvements to neighborhood amenities, such as improvement to parks, libraries, community centers, or assistance for program enhancement of targeting neighborhood residents, such as cultural youth opportunities. If a project is approved by the BPDA board, the developer must enter into a legal document called a cooperation agreement. The cooperation agreement details any and all agreed upon public benefits and mitigation to be provided by the development project. The Impact Advisory Group is allowed a 15-day review period on this final draft of the cooperation agreement. Throughout this entire process, the development team is encouraged to meet with local civic associations, elected officials, abutters, small businesses, and advocacy groups to brief them on the project under review and incorporate their comments and concerns in their initial and ultimately their final proposal. We wanted to make sure for today's discussion that we included Barry Reeves, who serves as our Director of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion at the BPDA. We felt that it was important that Barry hear the comments from this body as well as the public. In this new role, Barry is looking at all of our process through the lens of diversity and equity and working on ways our processes can further evolve to address these issues. As we approach this work, we've been looking at ways of engaging the community separate from a project, meeting, or a planning study. We're still in the process of forming these engagements, and we look forward to further dialogue with this body when we have a set framework for this community engagement. The timing of this hearing is welcomed, and we look forward to the conversation. And I think before I turn it back over to questions and answers, I think we just want to really acknowledge that, to some of the points made of this work is, we see the importance of it, and we know the value of people are volunteering their time and energy. And I think, a lot of things that have been talked about around, boot camps and kind of 101s and separate trainings. And, there's been, I think just even from this, that initial round of conversations, we have some really good things to think through and work on. And like I said, we welcome these conversations. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you very much. John, I see your hand is up.
Thanks, Councilor Wu. Thanks for chairing this conversation. I want to thank Councilor Mejia for bringing this topic forward. And I want to thank the public for both testifying and just participating as an audience member today. I'll keep my comments brief. I'm actually thrilled to be here. I got my second shot yesterday afternoon. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to, wasn't sure what kind of state it was going to be in. But I just want to say almost every comment I heard earlier, and I know many of you, I've talked to many of you previously, and I know how much you care about your communities and in public process. I love the ideas. And for example, next on our list, I know we've spent some time talking about this, but the furthering fair housing work and the language access work, one of the next things we are planning on doing is rolling out some sort of IEG training scenario. So Tony, I think you had the idea of a quarterly one. I think Jason, you talked about partnering with local orgs on that. I appreciate the idea of like, this is complicated stuff. We don't have to go it alone. I think we do better when we're working with local groups. And I heard great comments throughout from Tom, from Martin, from others. And so I just want to say thank you. And what I'd love to do, certainly we should engage in a robust discussion here, but also happy to invite any of the folks who testified today. We could either do a city council working session or just happy to convene a Zoom meeting in the next week or two to hear more detailed description of some of the ideas, because I know we had some time limits to kind of walk through some stuff. But I love the enthusiasm, love lots of the ideas. I think there's lots of common ground here. I think somebody, early on alluded to this, that Zoom has provided, I think actually it was Councilor Mejia, that Zoom has provided tremendous opportunity for a growth in the ability to engage across our city. But I also worry that we are leaving some people behind from digital divide and from access to technology. And so not only what are ways we can do better with IAG processes, but as we enter this kind of interesting hybrid world, I assume we get to more of a hybrid scenario. What are the opportunities for analog and digital engagement to pair together to make sure we're talking to communities across the city? So I think the technology in the moment provide an interesting inflection point for how we've been doing for the last year of virtual engagement, and then what comes next for the rest of 2021 and 2022. So just want to bring that offer to stand, and Councilor Wu will happily follow up with you afterwards just to make sure we get all the names and folks and invite to a deeper conversation. And happy to do this again in any format that either Councilor Wu or Councilor Mejia prefers, but just want to make sure that offer is a sincere one, and one I think the four of us who are gathered here to testify from the BPA perspective are excited to talk about. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Would Dana or Barry like to speak? We'd love to get your voices in, please.
Sure, Councilor Wu, I want to reiterate the thanks and gratitude from my colleagues, Michael and Jonathan, for the opportunity to, as was alluded to earlier, listen. I think one of the things we are striving to do more of is that. And so the ability to sit back and take in all of the ideas that have been expressed here is incredibly beneficial to us. And one of the things that strikes me as I've listened to all of you testify, and again, thank you to all those who offer this testimony, is we want to acknowledge that the work that is done in development is incredibly personal. This is activity that is happening in your neighborhoods, around your homes, around your businesses, and impacting people that you love. And we know that you're coming to us with these considerations and ideas and concerns from a place of wanting to do better, wanting us to do better. And we certainly share that feeling with you and look forward to the opportunity to take what we're doing now. You know, Mike did a review of what exists, but how can we enhance that, and how can we make it so that we can include as many voices in real and genuine and authentic ways for the betterment of the communities that we are here to serve? So thank you all. Look forward to working with you moving forward.
Thank you very much. Barry.
Thank you to all the distinguished panels and the guests and the counselors. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm excited about the work that we're doing ahead, and I don't want to continue to labor the point of what my colleagues have said, but I would like to continue to extend an opportunity to listen to these great ideals and wonderful things. One of my chief responsibilities in the agency is absolutely driving equity into everything that we do, but it's community engagement and ensuring that our community engagement understands the need and voices of the community that it serves. And so I'm definitely interested in hoping that I can meet and sit down and talk with everyone that really has great ideas to help us better understand how to framework this problem and to provide equitable solutions to support our communities. So thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you for your voices.
Thank you. Okay, now we'll open up to colleagues for questions. Councilor Mejia.
Yes, thank you. I'm so incredibly inspired by all the wisdom that's in this room, because I think in many ways, all the answers to how to address this issue have already been brought up, and I'm looking forward to working alongside the administration to implement them all. So I just have a few questions. I remember when I first started this job, I would get emails about nominating people, and I would always respond with very specific questions about what the time commitment looks like. I'm also curious, you know, in terms of the report backs, like once you have somebody who has been appointed, it would also be good to get updates. I always talk about being the dashboard queen, but there should be some sort of mechanism in place where there is reports that are submitted publicly so that we know what the outcomes of these conversations are. But anyways, let me get to some of my questions. I'm curious about how many people sit on impact advisory groups, our first time members, and I'm curious because we've gotten some concerns about the same usual suspects who always show up speaking on these panels, and I'd like to know how many people on IAGs are renters versus homeowners, and how many people on IAGs live in public housing So this goes back to just making sure that we're thinking about representation and that we have some data that we can hold ourselves accountable to. When you say that developers are quote unquote encouraged to reach out to the community, how often do they actually do that? And how do they let you know when they do? Like, I'm just curious about what the outcomes of those efforts are and who is monitoring those. We received complaints from constituents about how the BPDA's facilitators are showing up in these spaces with someone, with some saying these spaces felt combative. And I've actually been in some of those spaces even before I was a counselor. It does feel a bit hostile. So I'm just curious, how does the BPDA address one-on-one IAG's members' complaints? Do we need a civilian review board around these sort of things? I'm curious, how can the BPDA be more intentional about sourcing community participants that are more accurately represent the people most impacted by these projects? For example, if we know a project is going to involve units designed for families, how can we make sure that we're bringing families into the space, either by providing food and childcare or by holding these meetings at times that are more convenient for people? And I do think that, I love the idea of the boot camp. I think that we also just need to acknowledge that there's a lot of privilege for those folks who understand the process, and, 13,000 pages of documents to review is intimidating. So I just want to make sure that we're really thinking what the level of engagement looks like and how we're holding ourselves accountable to that level of education and training, so that people can really be prepared to participate in these processes. And while I'm on my soapbox, I do think that it's really important for us to really think about these community-centered models. And I think it was Gloribel who mentioned it, but that there should be some sort of independent process, right? I don't, and while I do appreciate the opportunity to nominate people, I think that it's a great privilege, but I don't think that that is the best way to go about it. So I'm curious what opportunities, if any, exist that the nomination process expands the voices of people who live in these communities and who are doing the work. I know that I've nominated people, and the way that I've gone about that is I put out a call to others to see if they've had any recommendations. And I don't think that I know of, none of the people that a few times, I don't know what the outcomes of those nominations have been either. So it would just be great if there was a way for us to be updated in terms of the people that we're nominating, whether or not they've made it into the cut. So then that way we know how to follow up and how to support these individuals in these spaces.
So I think a couple of us will jump on some of these. There was a lot of questions within that. I think on just as far as engagement relative to the outside world, so civic associations, abutters, I mean, that is imperative. I mean, when I say we recommend, we can't force them, but a project is going to have a hard time moving through the process if they're not engaging their abutters, their local civic association, and any of the major stakeholders. So that's something that, we every time we're talking to, whether it's a pre-file or projects are under review, we continue to kind of stress the importance of engaging, local civic associations and their abutters. And that's something I think we're pretty confident that happens. Now, I think the critique could be whether or not they listen. I think that's where there could be some room for critique. And then just relative to the impact advisory groups, nominations and folks being selected, I think we're always, we really stress to our project managers that we have an open line of communication with our local elected officials on if they are nominating folks and whether or not folks have been selected. And if there is an issue relative to a particular nominee, we make sure that we talk to the local elected official. I'd have to go back and look, Counselor, but I don't think we've had any issues with any of your nominations, but I don't know that to be fact, so I'd want to go back and just look to see if there's been any issues. But, as far as an open line of communication with particularly our elected officials on kind of projects and the process and nominations, that's something we pride ourselves on in the sense of keeping those lines of communication open.
So I just kind of want to,
anyone of my other colleagues want to jump on some of the other questions.
Before we do that, just want to point of clarification. When I've asked for specifics regarding the qualifications, what I've heard is for them to be thoughtful and to have an understanding of the process. And I think that not everyone has an understanding of the process. And I don't know if that's a fair prerequisite for people to sit in the space. I think that whether you know what the process looks like, you know what it feels like to be displaced, and you know what it feels like when things are being done to you without you. And I think that that is a valid that should count for something, and they should be considered and able to participate.
I think we agree 100%, Council. If there's instances, maybe that might have got lost in translation. I know I didn't have that conversation. It might have been a PM that you might have talked to, but anyone on this panel, we pretty much open, and we are open and welcoming to anyone that is nominated relative to the process, unless something particular comes up. So I'd love to sidebar with you on that relative to any particular conversations you've had that was the result of the conversation.
Council, if I may, this is Watside again from BPDA. I want to tag on to one particular aspect of one of your questions, and it's around the education piece. I think that you raised some valid concerns and questions that have been amplified by others during the testimony around, as you said, understanding of the process. And I think what we collectively, my colleagues and I, are hearing loud and clear is that there's an opportunity for us to enhance our efforts at providing even more clarity around, I'll say, the process at large, but also things like terminology. We live this lingo and language every day. Folks on this panel do, but not everybody in the stakeholder groups, community members do. And so we can certainly do more in the way of providing definitions, providing roadmaps, providing sort of a way to put things more in layperson's terms. And I think one of the things maybe a suggestion might be, or an offer might be, is as we come up with more of the educational tools that we'd want to put forth, provide an opportunity for a kind of working group conversation with yourself and others to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's going to provide that opportunity and that access to better information in a much clearer way.
So I'm just, thank you for that. But I'm curious who will answer the questions around who sits, on the IAGs, renters versus homeowners, how many are from public housing, any data on that? And I'm just also curious if someone could talk to me about when developers are encouraged to reach out to the community, what does that look like? Any feedback on that?
So we don't. Go ahead, Barry, if you're going to talk.
So, Councilor, I'll take that question. So what we're starting to do is that we're going to really start tracking that data to make sure that we are seeing the who is actually on the IAG, to ensure that we've got a broader sense of the type of people and population that are actually sitting on the council on board. That's one of my things that falls up under my shop to be responsible for. So we are going to begin to track that. We're also looking at how we can better ensure that the developer has a healthy engagement opportunity. We're using our community engagement managers in the agency to help facilitate that process in a more holistic way as well.
Could I just comment too, along Barry's line and the councilor's line as well, just to give you an example. We have a project in Alston, 119 Braintree Street, and the IAG that was put together there is a classic example of how the system failed us as a community. Here is a precedent-setting, defining project for the community of Alston, and yet the IAG was composed of a same old nucleus of people who share the same narrow social, political, and economic views, not representative at all of the community. I think one member of the IAG is a renter. Only one member of the IAG actually lives in Alston. That's just a classic example of the system gone wrong. And that's why in my prepared remarks, that I'm suggesting that there needs to be a more extended review before the IAG is announced publicly, where elected officials and community leaders get a chance to look at who is being appointed and have an opportunity to comment, because I would have been very critical if I had known about this in advance. And yet the disappointing fact about it is, I brought it up at the first IAG meeting publicly, and it was not directed personally at anybody on the IAG. It was directed at the process that simply failed. And there was no intent on the part of the BPDA to make any changes and basically to leave the IAG intact the way it was. So that's just an example. We need to take this process more seriously. We need to engage as many people and organizations as possible. And we need to ensure that before these IAGs are announced to the public, that they truly represent the communities and they have a nice mix of maybe experienced and new people involved, and that they are not dominated by a core group of individuals that are simply going to write the comment letter as everybody expects they will. So that's just an example.
Thank you, Tony, for that. And I know that Councillor Wu is being generous with me, but I'm sure my time is up. I do think it's important. I'll wait for the next round of questions, and I think I also have some questions for the advocates. So, Councillor Wu.
You're the lead sponsor, Councillor Mejia, and so I would defer. Councillor Braden, do you have a time constraint? I'm happy to defer all my questions. Councillor Braden.
No, I'm fine for now. Yeah, I don't have any time constraints at the moment.
Thank you. Councillor Mejia, why don't you go ahead with your questions for advocates too?
Yeah, and I also just kind of want to also just note that I did ask around having a dashboard or some sort of public information sharing. I believe information justice is the way that we're going to get towards transparency. So I would just kind of make note that once these folks have been assigned, that there is some process in place for us to, as regular residents, to get updated. So in terms of just my questions for the our advocates, I'm curious, Jason, what are some of the biggest questions community members have come up while learning about what to advocate for in the development space? And Gloribel, I'm just going to give you all the questions, so when it's your turn, you could just go right to it. Gloribel, I would like to know what can the city do to make the IAG process more understandable to people who speak English, who speak languages other than English? And Tony, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about how can we make sure that IAGs are more representative of the community, particularly around making sure that they're intergenerational as well? And how can we ensure that IAG members are more hyperlocal, which I think you already alluded to. And then Mike, what can the city do to make sure that these spaces are more representative of renters and other people who are mostly impacted? And anyone can answer this one too. Is something that has come up in the past is the idea of offering stipends for people who serve on IEGs. What are your thoughts on this? I really love that idea. I think in every space that I've been in, every public hearing, I have been fighting for stipends, whether it be through BPS and the parent engagement place. I mean, when you look around the table, most of the people that are in those spaces are either paid because they are representing a nonprofit, or they're paid because they have to be there. And usually the people who are always expected to quote unquote volunteer the time are the people who are living these realities. And I think that if we're really serious about equity, then we need to put some budget aside for providing stipends to people for their participation. So I would kind of want to underscore the importance of that. Those are a lot of questions, and we'll go to Jason first, and then we're going to do quickly, okay, y'all, before I get the gavel.
So if I remember your question, because it was like a little while ago, around questions or concerns that residents and stakeholders have as part of the process. I mean, it all depends on the resident or the stakeholder. It's pretty much contextualized within the particular folks. But, in terms of themes, it's how do these projects kind of all fit together? I mean, Tony brought up, 119 Braintree Street. I just wrote down real quick that we have 4 projects right now under review on Braintree Street, along with Stop and Shop, which was recently approved, 40 Rug Road, which was approved not too long ago, and a handful of projects on North Beacon Street, which is on the other side of Braintree Street. So there's a lot of development, and they all have different IAGs. And so how do these sort of how do we build momentum and know what each IAG is talking about, and which is kind of maybe leads into the idea of maybe regional IAGs. And so Braintree Street all has one IAG, Western Ave and Alston has the Harvard Alston Task Force, and kind of, because they are in this space. And so they kind of have the ideas of, this developer's, doing this for mitigation and community benefits. And so this developer should do X. And a lot of my work with the residents is around trade-offs, right? Because everyone wants everything. They want more affordability, less density, more parking, and more green space. Well, the way that I talk about trade-offs is that if you pull the low density lever, the affordability lever might not work. If you pull the more parking lever, the affordability lever not work, because parking is extremely expensive to build. And so in determining how we talk about community benefits and understanding that there are trade-offs. And so if we have all of these developments along Braintree Street, North Beacon Street, and Cambridge Street currently under review or recently approved, this developer can do this for affordability. This developer over here can do a little bit of green space, which might be connected to this development over here, which to provide more green space. And so how do we look at this in the aggregate rather than development by development? And then just real quick on your thought on stipends, I don't necessarily have, I think, obviously paying for people's time is extremely important, but we used to, we had a couple residents from our affordable housing developments who were on IAGs. And it worked out pretty well. I provided a lot of sort of support for these, going through the PNF with them. This shadow study means this parking study means this, traffic study means this. And so in terms of breaking down the sort of the complex language. And we provided childcare for her. We paid for her babysitter as well as dinner for her kids, so she'd be able to participate in meetings, but that's not sustainable, at least for, a small organization like ours. But I think, in terms of being creative on how you sort of really appreciate people for their time, whether it's, childcare, food, transportation, or whatever that ends up being.
Okay, so I think Goribel, you were up next. What can the city, I'll repeat the question. What can the city do to make the IAG process more understandable to people who speak languages other than English?
Okay, can you hear me? I'm not sure. Okay, great. So thank you. So this is something that we've been thinking about a lot of time, and we participated in the advisory groups, and a lot of our neighbors that only are predominantly Spanish speaking. And, even in the most recent one, the Suffolk Downs development project, that's going to be huge, and it's going to change the makeup, not just of East Boston, but of the whole city. The first thing is that language and interpretation is an afterthought. And which is very surprising, considering that most of the statistics that we do get comes from the development department, of knowing what the language and the demographic and social. So you would anticipate more intentionality to make sure at least that the language access is there. And so serving culturally competent, intentional interpretation, not just in English and Spanish, but Spanish and English and other languages that we know exist is possible. We're doing it even on a local scale for the mutual aid network to make sure that neighbors that speak different language could talk to each other. How can we make sure that the city systems, not just in development, but in all departments, are able to serve that multilingual aspect? So we want to, and we also want to encourage, and something that I mentioned was that each planner right now, it feels, in the experience that we had, is that people that are assigned from the department to a certain project are more aligned of looking at the project getting and the interest of the developer, but how can we really shift that to be more of developing authentic relationships with the community to know who are the groups, the formal groups and nonprofit organizations, but also small emerging groups of neighbors that are coming that are not in the civic associations, because even the civic associations need to do more on language access. So there are informal spaces that you could find these voices, and also use the departments that we already know our families are engaging and could be strengthened. Like the education, Boston Public School is a great place to find parents and renters in homes. And how can if there was a family community engagement coordinator in each school, we're able to connect those links to make sure that those are spaces that people could provide informal feedback, surveys, et cetera, and even youth spaces that could also bring in an intergenerational voice of the future of the city that most of our youth are going to be living in. So that could allow for families that have youth that speak English, and that could serve as a language barrier and connection as well. So our goal, and Nube and me as a community leader, is to ensure that those that are most impacted the smallest way, the smallest voice could be more amplified, and to have more, even if the process takes longer, if we're able to do that, I think that the outcome would be much more fruitful.
I do have a quick little follow-up, Councilor Wu, to what he did. I'm just curious, I do appreciate translation and interpretation as a part of it, but I'm curious, have you seen the impact that having native language speakers at these meetings, as opposed to the translation piece, some benefits to...
Definitely. And I mean, I think we have a lot of our own members and neighbors and folks that are bilingual and multicultural that could serve that role, that could be stipend as well. And if we wanted to do that, so people that culturally know, that come from the neighborhood, could understand the dynamic that are allowed that. And how to create a more partnerships, how do you create a food loop, like a loop of feedback? So for example, we said, we need more interpretation, we need these things but we never hear back. Okay, we got these comments, so what are you doing now? Mm-hmm. We go to the next meeting, the same issues, the same thing. So it's not about becoming whiners and trying to complain. It's about there's a systemic issue. It's not new. It's not what is the problem? Is it resources? Well, there's tons of money coming in from all these developments. So there's a disconnect of what the community and me as a neighbor has experienced, and what it seems like, okay, we're just going through the process of writing letters, coming for comments, spending our time, and for those that are in the impact advisory, their volunteer time to really participate in the voice of creating an economic future for others. So providing stipends, creating the most space so you could have the best civic participation, I think should be the primary goal of any public institution.
Yes, thank you for that.
Thank you.
Tony, your question was, just so I can remind, unless you wrote it down like a good student.
Yes, Councilor. I thought of a few items that I had put in my prepared remarks, and I'll kind of go through those again. But another one I just kind of thought of is that, if we're going to keep, like you said, Councilor, the current system of nomination, the same people, elected officials and the mayor's office and BPDA, what have you, to nominate people, when that announcement comes out from the BPDA, and I don't know if it is, and if this is something that maybe Barry could help out on, when those people get the letter from BPDA, hey, so-and-so has just filed an LOI, it's an Article 80 large project review, it is in your district or it's in your impacted area, please go ahead and nominate candidates for the IAG. I think we need to make sure that we remind these people in the document that of these goals that we're talking about being more inclusive, about being more diverse, the importance of having a truly representative IAG, because sometimes, I think it's a process that just, geez, we want to get this out of the way as quick as possible, throw this name out, throw that name out. And usually, like I said, it's the same, sometimes it's the same people over and over again. So I think within the correspondence to the people who are nominating, I think we need to heighten their awareness of the importance of trying to go for more diversity and inclusivity. The other aspect that like I said, I consider it very important, and Jason knows this, we have a lot of nonprofits in our community who represent a wide divergence of people, demographics in our community that are not brought into this process. If they were brought into this process, I think you would have greater opportunity of getting more diversity into the process. When it's just restricted to a certain few people, it's very frustrating. Again, it opens up the possibility of more of the same. Education, I mentioned, is very important. People can't feel like they're going to be overwhelmed if they go on to an IAG for the first time. It has to be a welcoming situation. They have to feel like that they're going to get some education, but more importantly, they're going to be able to mentor with some experienced people on the IAG and bring their level of knowledge up to speed. So I think the education piece is important. And believe me, for a lot of young people, especially people of color, they've got to trust the system. They have to see that the system works on their behalf, that their voices are going to be heard. When in our situation, when they look at IAGs being formed, they see the same people not only involved in the IAG, but dominating the discussion. Why waste my time? Then my voice is not going to be heard. So it's very, very important that we carry on the work, Councilor, that you're starting to make this a better process, because if we can instill trust in our young people, especially people of color, that this process can work for everybody, I think we'll get a much better response and a much more representation of our community. So.
Mike, I have taken over this. You can put me on mute, Councilor Wu. I think the next person was Mike, and I see that, John, you had your hand up, and I wasn't sure if you wanted to chime in, and I don't know.
Yeah, why don't we hear from Mike, and then we'll go to John and Barry, and then I'll go on. Although I received a note that Councilor Braden did have to hop off after all, so I've asked if she has any questions that she would like me to ask on her behalf, and then we'll go to Councilor Edwards.
I'll be like as brief as I can. So, Councilor Mejia, you had asked how IAGs could be more representative of renters. I would say engaging with many more CBOs that focus on residents directly and not necessarily civic associations and neighborhood associations. They serve a purpose, but honestly, and I mean, I'm president of one, so I know it, there's people who join civic and neighborhood associations do tend to be homeowners more frequently. Then I'm going to reiterate what Tony said. People have to trust the system, and they don't right now. Why waste the time? It's something that I'm struggling with in getting my civic association to better represent the actual area that we encompass. It's a challenge, you know. It's not easy, and it's not anyone's fault. It's just how the system has been. You know, it's stupid to be like, oh, is this person? No, it's just how the system has been. We need to make it better. But so yeah, engaging with CBOs, because CBOs are typically better at getting just interested members as participants. But then after that, I'm going to go back to supporting civic associations and neighborhood associations in making sure that they're able to recruit all residents in the area, because that I'm not aware of any civic association or neighborhood association that is trying to be a homeowners association. It is not the case. It is just the way it's been, and people feel like they're not invited to the table. It's not true, but we as organizations need help in pushing this forward, right? You know, I mean, I know a lot about engagement and I'm trying, but I'm in touch with a lot of other groups. It's a struggle to make sure that everyone has a voice. After that, changing how IAGs are, populated. I mean, if you have 25 relevant groups in an area, 25 members, one representative from each group. If you have 10, whatever, if you have 380, then that's the way it's got to be. I understand 380 is actually untenable, but that's the way it's got to be. You got to get everyone's voice in. I think I answered that. I had more stuff to talk about for education, but I want other people to talk first, and hopefully I can add that later.
Thank you. John?
I just wanted to add to in the language discussion where, Greenridge was involved and still involved in a couple of different Title VI complaints on precisely this issue. And the one thing that the most practical and easy to implement thing to do on everyone's part is really getting to the heart of DEI, and that is just to hire some people, whether you're a developer and I know the BPDA, there's now more Spanish-speaking staff. And my advice to the developers is to get Spanish-speaking staff either on your own team or the consultants that you're working with who can present your story, your project, and sell your project in the language of the community, rather than having an interpreter come in who has no clue about development. And thinking of Suffolk Downs, they were talking about, in the space of a 30-minute thing of Tom O'Brien going a mile a minute selling this thing, he would talk about wetland science, traffic studies, solar panels, and sewage treatment, and just knowing the vocabulary is an impossibility. And the person that he grabbed and hired and paid, and that's a problem right there, because it should be the BPDA doing that, not the developer necessarily directly doing it. That person was probably normally translating either for people at a medical facility or maybe in a legal setting or something like that. And they're suddenly trying to interpret all these different things, and they don't have the vocabulary for it. And literally in the headsets, you hear somebody just say, I'm sorry, I can't keep up with them. And there needs to be some recognition that interpretation is something that you're better off served by having somebody that knows the topic matter do the sales pitch in the language, rather than just having someone who knows the sales pitch do it and having somebody trying to frantically translate it. And then you also then address some of your DEI issues in your business as well, or your institution or whatever. So you two birds, one stone.
Thank you. Barry?
Well, once again, these are all great comments. So I kind of want to also do a shameless plug because we actually are in the process of working on a community engagement strategy outside of as Jonathan said, outside of the Article 80 process to make it holistic. So what I would love to have is that all the participants that are here sharing to actually be willing to sit down with me and actually start putting together a working group to actually not just talk about the issue, but actually really laying out a healthy strategy that actually that'll inform our overall agency policy and how we do business. The other thing that I would also share with you is that I'm beginning to have discussions with a lot of the developer chief diversity officers in this space as well to talk about how we do better in that space. So this is, like I said, this is one of my chief responsibilities to really bridge and build our capacity for DEI in all the spaces, not just the agency space. So I would love to be able to pull together this working group from all the different participants and really help me craft out a strategy of community engagement that's more effective, that really meets the community needs outside of the planning and development process. Because I believe, to one of the participants' points, community engagement can't just be a transactional thing. It's got to be an ongoing relationship. And so we need to build relationships and build trust in that space, and that people believe that the system is actually fair and responsive to them. And that's one of my many responsibilities on my plate, but I would love to be able to start working on that project together. So I would love to have that help from the staff and the community.
Thank you very much. And Councilor Braden's feedback was also that she believed a working session as a follow-up would be appropriate and to make sure we're digging into the details here. We'll go now to Councilor Edwards.
Thank you. Apologize for being late. This is certainly an issue that has impacted my community a great deal, as John had mentioned. I see Glory Bell is also here, who I just want to thank you so much in general, Glory Bell, for your organizing and voice building and empowerment. And it's great that you're here also to be part of this conversation. I'm sure that a lot of what I'm going to say has already been said. So I just wanted to make sure that we walked away with some concrete goals for either the working session or by the end of budget season, maybe that they are implemented in part of our conversation. That every developer should understand that part of their development, part of their permitting, part of their costs is also just a line item for translation and interpretation. It should just be understood, part of your permitting fees. Whether you use it on your project or not, I don't care. But there should be a growing pool of funds that's collected at the BPDA for interpretation. And that way, if you come over to East Boston, I know that the developer can pull from that fund, or the BPDA will direct certain funds or match them with some of those funds so that they can use that, so they can get the interpreter, or that we can pull from interpreters. I recommend the Boston Interpreters Collective, for example, and a cooperative to help with that. So that's just one concrete thing that we could just do. It's part of the process. It's a cost that they should just be handling, and pull the money and help to pay for interpretation. The other thing, I think we need to look at census tracts, and we need to look at how our IAGs match or don't match the census tracts in our neighborhoods. And that also, it could be if you want to be as direct and say it's a quota system, or if you just want to just say, listen, our IAGs need to look like the communities that they purport to say that they're going to be impacting. Just as I get it, I can see some folks in the BPDA saying, damn it, counselor, you're one of the people who pick who's on the IAG. Understood. But if you set standards straight out before and you tell me, these are the standards, this is what the neighborhood looks like, this is what the census tract looks like, pick within here, that helps to give me a guidepost and a goal, right? It helps because there's so many projects, sometimes it is exhausting, and the time commitment is limiting for a lot of people. It is limiting. There are a lot of people who have 2 jobs. They'd love to have an impact, but they can't make this many meetings at this particular time. So I hope that you will continue with the digital infrastructure that helps to enhance and allow for people to participate. I think that this is a good thing. I don't think we should absolutely abandon in-person meetings once we're able to open up, but I think we need to have a hybrid going forward. There are people who are able to participate on their cell phone like I'm doing right now in ways with direct and simultaneous interpretation that they just couldn't if they showed up at an IAG meeting at the gym in a place that there's no parking, if they have a car at all, and sometimes it's not all of these different things and barriers that get in between. So these are not perfect, but these are, I think, more inclusive oriented, direct goals. And I apologize if they've already been stated, but these are things that I would like to see as part of just on the to-do list when you're picking an IAG. This is what happens. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone like to respond to Councillor Edwards? And I'm not quite sure. John, I see your hand is up, but I'm not sure if it's, okay, so from before. Rich?
Thank you. It's actually, I have a 3:30 that I have to jump off for. I really appreciate where we've been so far with this meeting and the size and scope of it. And so we've already started a working group here. So I think this has been really good. And I appreciate Jonathan and Barry and Dana and Mike for being here and working with us on this. I don't want to reiterate any of the things we've said, but the one thing that I think we also need to keep in mind is that we really need to be cognizant on the ground, neighborhood specific. Everything that we've kind of talked about has been very broad and general. And some of our neighborhoods are quite peculiar. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Fenway has almost no home ownership and almost 80–90% renters. So, you're lucky sometimes you just get more renters in our neighborhood. But oddly enough, we also have no public housing. And so there's a lot of varieties of things going on in different neighborhoods that we need to take into account. And also the fact that particular neighborhoods, there's an enormous amount of projects, and in other neighborhoods, very few. So, we can't do one size fits all. I was doing a presentation for our board recently, trying to give them a fast review of the last year or two's projects and what's going forward. And I stopped at 16, and a couple of board members reminded me that I'd forgotten 2 or 3 others. So, that's what's going on in the Fenway, because we're surrounded by institutions and big developers. We might need a particular, sort of look at, since we have multiple projects, we just now, I think the BRA figured out, along with Councilor Bach, to have a sort of more consolidated IAG or CAC for 3 projects that are all happening within a few blocks of each other. But, we also have to get down to the local conditions to figure some of this stuff out as to how it should really work better. I love all the ideas about the training. We've done that before ourselves. We've also pulled in BRA project managers to do that. There is a very comprehensive glossary on the website that we've used. Also, I've had to simplify it and turn it into civilian language in some cases. But, I think maybe we all as a group can work towards a more coherent and unified forward-facing outreach effort that incorporates a lot of what's already been done, but that, like Tony and Jason were talking about, the boot camp and the training, so that, maybe within a half a year to a year, we've got something that could be a road show that's pretty consistent, comprehensive, generic enough that we could roll out and or enroll people too. Similar, the State House does that with a citizen training academy. It's a 2 or 3 day thing though. But it'd be great if we could set something up like that with the BRA. But wow, sign me up for whatever working groups we do. And I thank you, counselors and staffers for starting this process,
Just responding quickly to something that Councilor Edwards had said in her statements around, sort of like being intentional around including folks holistically and intentionally, is also having a clear understanding of the expectations, obviously, of an IAG in terms of like time commitment, not only around like, how many hours like a week or a month, but also duration. Because IAG sort of like, comprised for a couple months. We had St. Gabriel's project, which took almost 2 years, start to finish. And so, you can span the anywhere between 6 months for some of the quicker projects to, 18 months to 2 years. And, who has the ability to, work on a project like that for 2 years and sort of like, make sure that it is the perfect, the good project that it needs to be by the end of it.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, I want to make sure we're getting to, Mike, do you have one quick comment?
Yeah, I can say
jump in quickly, and then I'm going to conclude the panel to make sure we're finishing up public testimony.
Totally, I can say it quickly. We're talking about like educating people and, collaborate with educators, right? Like I can think of 10 BPS teachers off the top of my head who would be expert at being able to provide this information to adults. Just because you're telling it mainly to adults, it doesn't mean that good teaching practices aren't effective. The other thing I'd say is let's go big. Try to make a civic education course in BPS that focuses on civic engagement, part of it being development and kind of just the basics of it. Obviously, we're not training people to be BPDA members, but it's worthwhile. And I know that there's actually a lot of BSAC members, Boston Student Advisory Council, who are interested in creating a template for civic engagement lessons for high school students in BPS. let's use it. There's movement here. There's a lot of space. It shouldn't just all be on the BPDA to make sure that people know things. It would be unfair to y'all. Like, well, we can do it together. I'm done.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to, I want to make sure we go through anyone else who is interested in testifying. And so for those who are signed on in the attendee room, or if you could go to the bottom of your screen and click the raise hand button if you'd like to testify, and I will start adding people now. So I see, okay, from Lydia Lowe and Jacqueline Yessian. Anyone else? Okay, those are the two we have for now. Lydia, welcome.
Thank you. I've been listening to the panel, and I just really agree with all of the comments that I've been hearing. I really appreciate having this hearing. I feel like in the past it hasn't, and I've been involved. I have to say, like, I've become comfortable talking in these public meetings because of being like involved in fighting unwanted developments for 30 years. So it took me 30 years to get to that point, and it shouldn't have to take that long. But I think in the past, it hasn't always been clear where the IAG comments and public comments go. And I feel like we are starting to see some change. So I'm really happy for this conversation. I think there's been this assumption that the IAG, it's primarily there to negotiate for benefits. And in the past, sometimes it was like, who are the community groups that are most connected? But instead of I think now we're starting to have like real community conversations about how can we actually, from these development projects that are commercial development projects that are happening, create actual positive investment and impacts from those. But that's a complicated conversation, and there's still a lot that goes on behind closed doors, and we need to figure out how to bring that out into a broader community discussion. I also believe that, having the fair housing impact assessment added to part of what the IAG talks about, in addition to environmental impact, that's really important, especially in this moment, because people getting pushed out of the city is the biggest concern on the table. And, actually having that in the review process is very powerful and a great thing that the city has done. Again, we've seen a lot of changes in BPDA public meetings in Chinatown in the last year, particularly around language access and sensitivity to, how to help people participate, but it's still very uneven. And I think in terms of IAGs, we've seen it really depends a lot on who's the project manager that you're working with sometimes. And there's often this assumption that the IAG is something that just meets once, but you're not doing anything significant if it just meets once. And, actually we've seen where residents on the IAGs have taken the initiative to say, no, we want to actually organize and, make actual decisions together that have pushed, the BPDA manager that they want to meet again. And that's been a good thing. I agree with people that we need a more public invitation so that people know in the neighborhood that then there is an IAG and that they could apply or, nominate themselves or something like that. And that then we need extra support to really broaden that pool of residents and community stakeholders that can participate, because I think it's very intimidating. And even, I think that's part of the reason that we keep seeing the same people. Part of it is who's more connected, who knows, but it's also that a lot of residents just don't feel confident to go into these spaces. So, we need it's not just interpretation, it's all the things people are talking about. We need childcare, we need orientation, to what all of the development terminology and things mean, and the type of work that Jason talked about. And then I just want to add a couple other things. One is this thing about the borders of neighborhoods. because it's sort of like, okay, if you live on this side of the street, in our case, the big dividing line that we've been having a lot of fights about is the Mass Pike. If you're on this side of the Mass Pike, you're in Chinatown. If you're on that side of the Mass Pike, you're in the South End. But to us, that was one continuous community until urban renewal railroaded through the middle of our community. So we just keep, having to go after the different project managers and ONS and keep, saying over and over again, no, we need to be notified about those projects too. So I feel like that's both something that, BPDA needs to be aware of, but also Office of Neighborhood Services and all the other departments. Because I've spoken to Barry about this, that, we see a lot of inconsistency between BPDA, zoning, permitting, and everything like that. And then finally, I feel like it's not just about IAGs, but it's really a broader question about community governance. And the IAGs is a good starting point. The idea of having, those consolidated IAGs sounds good instead of just looking at everything project by project, which is really developer driven. And I know in Chinatown, because we've just been, Chinatown has had an onslaught of development forever. And so because of that, we have actually organized ourselves into a master plan committee, and it kind of plays that role of making the, keeping an overview of the different projects and discussing it together. But I don't see the city having a comparable process. And so I feel like that's the next step, is that we really need that kind of real community governance mechanism in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Jacqueline? Or Jacqueline, I'm so sorry.
Thank you. This is Jackie Essian, and it's so nice to see you, Lydia. I haven't seen you in years. But we met.
I know, I'm seeing all these people I know over the years. We're still here.
Yeah, I'm happy to join us, and it's really interesting to hear other neighborhoods' perspectives. I live in the Back Bay, and I've been the development committee chair for many years. So part of what I've done is educate people, support people, and get them on the IAGs to try and have more people in our neighborhood who know how to do this. I did want to say that we think that CAC model is superior to the IAG model because you start earlier and you last longer in the project. And we would like to see that changed back. They used to be a lot of CACs. So does that make sense? Lydia is shaking her head. You can see that. So anyway, thank you so much. I look forward to anything I can do on this effort.
Thank you very much. Okay, I just want to be totally sure, because sometimes we have a little bit of funny stuff with the raise hand function working or not working. So I'm going to just add in everyone else who had not spoken yet from the waiting room. And just in case, you could give a wave if you did want to speak. And we also have one person who's called in who I actually don't have the ability to add in, but could ask you to unmute and speak if you had wanted to as well. Phone number ending in 366. Okay, anyone else wish to speak before we close out? Sarah.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. My name is Sarah McCammond. I live at 15 Channel Center Street in the Fort Point neighborhood of South Boston. And I just had a couple remarks. First of all, I think there's been a lot of great comments, and I reiterate education in training and developing a pool of IAG members. It would be a very positive thing. But I'd also like to suggest that that there also be the list of IAG members and who nominated them be published as part of the transparency and going forward, that there be a conflict of interest policy that was suggested early on at the start of the hearing. And I also would like to suggest that there be an independent liaison for IAG members. There's are times when the project manager is representing the BPDA and there's conflict and there's really no independent liaison for the IAG members to override that sort of conflict. So just wanted to suggest that that might be a role that needs to be provided for. I'd like to also support what Lydia said, that when you have a project that is in multiple neighborhoods, that there be fair representation from those neighborhoods on the IAG. And when we're looking at multiple projects that are occurring in one street or one area with varying IAGs, there needs to be an ability to understand how the project you might be serving on or interacts with the one down the street, especially in what kind of community benefits are being offered, how can these projects complement each other, and that sort of regional, if we can call it regional or more global approach, is not afforded by parcel, and there may be an opportunity where there could be a joint meeting that outlines these things for not only IAG members, but also the public. And just very quickly, that just want to say overall, a lot of the meetings that we are involved with, there's not enough time left for public engagement. So that might be something that the BPDA may want to consider to make sure that there's ample time for engagement. And as you consider a hybrid format, you're really going to have a situation where the people that are there in person and can talk to each other needs to be replicated online. And so getting rid of that webinar format and having more of a Zoom meeting format when you can see who's in the meeting, you can chat with each other, I would really encourage, as well as I think will promote greater public interaction. And we talked about experienced and new IAG members. I'd also like to suggest that maybe new project managers are coupled with more experienced property managers, and in order for it to have a more productive experience. And then I've participated in both planning and development projects, and I think if the BPDA could take a look and take best practices and tools from both processes to become the standard of how they interact going forward would also be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else who has not spoken like to weigh in? Okay. Then I want to thank everyone for your time and your incredible feedback and suggestions and ideas and continued energy to keep this conversation going. I'll hand it over to Councillor Mejia for a closing before we wrap up.
Thank you, Councillor Wu, for chairing this, and to all of the folks that showed up and made their voices heard. I'm really encouraged by the conversation. I feel like we really definitely want to just move beyond the dialogue. So my hope is that we are able to create some sort of citywide standards across the board in terms of what community engagement looks like. From what I understand, the way they develop is different in Alston and Brighton is different than the way they develop in Dorchester, and is different than the way they develop in Back Bay. And so I just think that we need to come across with some standards around community engagement and hold ourselves accountable to just that. And one last question that I have, but I'll just make it more as a statement to this point is I'd love to see the city be able to implement a citywide or a neighborhood-specific policies that better address development in all of our communities. So I think that the onus should be on the city to hold themselves accountable, but the creation of what that looks like has to be led by the people who are doing the work and living these realities every day. So it should be the mandate that we're going to take what we heard here and come back with some really solid recommendations. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, we hosted a town hall earlier this, in April. It's April, today's the last day of April. Okay, a few weeks ago, and really we left there inspired and ready to create a citywide steering committee to continue this conversation and to come across with some standards and a Bill of Rights, if you will. And so we'd like to move into a working session to really make that happen. So thank you again to all who have joined, and the community engagement continues. And thank you, Councilor Wu, for chairing.
Thank you very much. This will conclude the City Council's hearing on docket number 0356, order for a hearing on community voice and impact advisory group sponsored by Councilor Julia Mejia. This hearing is adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your time today.